equally globally. Because in some countries, these thieves are treated as better citizens, while they've benefited against the most vulnerable ones. Bomele bontate, I thank you for your concentration, and thank you very much.
From henceforth, I'll be very observant of who these thieves are. It is my honor to invite Professor Shaka Anasate to the podium, the Minister of Local Government, Republic of Rwanda.
Your Excellency, Dr. Mokgweetsi A.K. Masisi, President of the Republic of Botswana, the Vice President, Your Excellency Nangolo Mbumba, Vice President of Namibia, Honorable Ministers here present, Honorable Commissioner, African Union, Manita Samate, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It is a great honor for me to address this dialogue on winning the fight against corruption, a sustainable path to Africa's transformation, on behalf of His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, in his capacity as the chairperson of the African Union. I wish to extend my profound gratitude to His Excellency Dr. Mokgweetsi A.K. Masisi, the President of Botswana, and the government of Botswana for hosting this 7th high-level dialogue on democracy, human rights, and governance in Africa, whose raison d'etre is to explore normative, structural, and implementation enablers for sustainable anti-corruption effort in Africa. Africa must tackle the scourge of corruption in the private sector, in the public sector, and in the non-state sector head-on if we are to make progress towards an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in international arena, as this is enshrined in the Agenda 2063 of the Africa we want. This is why African leaders at the AU summit held in Addis Ababa in January this year committed themselves to putting in place sustainable and collective efforts to address this challenge. Today's gathering presents a golden opportunity to deliberate on this serious obstacle to Africa's progress and a contributing factor to violent conflicts on the continent. Corruption is not unique to Africa, but it continues to be at the center of discourse on governance deficits and in practice undermines the effectiveness of African institutions. According to the report of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa, commissioned by the Economic Commission for Africa and the AU, and led by His Excellency former President Thabo Mbeki, Africa loses over 50 billion US dollars every year through illicit financial flows. 50 billion USD. And you can do the math. If you look at our African Union budget and all our 8 regional economic groupings budget, all together, it doesn't even count for 2 billion. And yet, in most of the cases, we have difficulties in sustaining their funding, but we lose over 50 billion USD every year through illicit financial flows. This massive leakage of African resources through rampant corruption, primarily by foreign companies, constitutes a major drain on our socio-economic development. It surpasses by far foreign direct investment and foreign aid into Africa. In other words, we can achieve faster socio-economic transformation, become more prosperous, and at the same time significantly reduce dependency on aid if we only prioritized accountability and public integrity on our continent. Corruption not only hinders Africa's socio-economic advancement, it also contributes to weakening governance institutions and undermines democracy. As a direct or indirect factor in conflict and instability, corruption breeds insecurity, which in turn leads to poor socioeconomic indicators we see in some parts of our continent. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this dialogue provides a platform for us to share comparable lessons and experiences in fighting corruption. More importantly, it is an opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to the ratification, domestication, and implementation of the 2003 African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. There is unprecedented momentum at the African Union with institutional reforms driven by our continent's leaders already bearing fruits towards a more effective, self-financed organization. The Continental Free Trade Area and the free movement of persons signed this year offers extraordinary prospects for our continent's development. As member states, we will continue to fight against illicit financial flows and work hand in hand with the private sector, media, and civil society as committed partners in the fight against corruption in Africa in order to achieve our vision of a united, peaceful, and prosperous Africa. In this fight, we are together. On est ensemble. I thank you for your kind attention. Merci beaucoup.
Dr. Nangolo Mbumba, Vice President of the Republic of Namibia. Your Excellency, sir.
Thank you very much, Honorable Nonofo Molefi, Minister of Presidential Affairs, Governance and Public Administration, and our Director of Ceremonies. Your Excellency, Dr. Mokwetsi Masisi, President of the Republic of Botswana, Her Excellency Minata Sesuma, Commissioner of Political Affairs, African Union Commission, Professor Shiaka Anastase, Minister of Local Government, and representative of the Chairperson of the African Union, namely the President. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am truly pleased to be part of this very important high-level gathering, whose main objective is to explore sustainable solutions which will help African governments to govern prudently and distribute fairly the resources at their disposal to ensure a balanced spread of shared national prosperity among all our citizens. In the same vein, I am also bringing to you our host, Your Excellency President Masisi, and distinguished members of the House. Special greetings from my President, Dr. Geingob, who consider people-contented development to be the center of economic development. He would have been happy to be here, but most unfortunately, due to other equally weighty official state matters, he regrettably could not attend and has thus delegated me. Ladies and gentlemen, our assembly here to dialogue on the subject of democracy, human rights and governance in Africa, trends, challenges, and prospects, with a specific theme on winning the fight against corruption, a sustainable path to Africa's transformation, conclusively illustrate that the development agenda, which focuses on the improvement of the well-being of the African people, has assumed center stage in the minds of African leaders and in the hearts of African people. This is a fundamental departure from the Africa of the 1950s through to the 1990s and early 2000s, which initially was characterized by our efforts to decolonize Africa, and later by internal strife, civil wars, revolutions, and coup d'etats, an early independent African state. During those periods, the African people never knew peace, never knew and could not possibly dream about development and prosperity. On the contrary, the present-day Africa, by and large, is blessed with abundant peace and therefore dares to dream and visualize a better future of hope and good governance. Moreover, the present-day Africa is also blessed with a progressive class of vibrant, visionary, and transformative, development-oriented African leaders. These leaders are reminiscent of the colonial status quo challenging spirit and ethos as personified in the first generation leadership, such as Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Leopold Sédar Senghor, Cesare Tekama, Agostinho Neto, Samora Machel, Nelson Mandela, Sam Nujoma, and many others. These are men, and among them also women, who were profoundly cognizant that the principal raison d'etre of their leadership was to obtain political freedom as a non-negotiable, inalienable birthright for the African women, men, and children. Not minding personal dangers, to themselves or to their families. They selflessly gave their all. Many even paid with their very lives. Hence, today our generation and the generations to come are standing on the tall shoulders of giants who brought political independence to all African countries, with, of course, exception of Western Sahara. Undeniably, today such a principled, sacrificial, and people-centered servanthood leadership is a precondition to foster a continent-wide, united front against hunger, poverty, unemployment, climate change, disease, corruption, and the myriads of similar centrifugal forces that have hitherto denied millions of Africans, despite their political freedom, the enjoyment of economically free lives. Ladies and gentlemen, the question of a corruption-free Africa, an Africa in which the people are to become the architects of their prosperous and well-governed societies, should never be envisioned outside of its colonial history, which bequeathed to us with broken society, malfunctioning systems, ill-conceptualized institutions, and subsequent weak governance architecture. Indeed, we should never make the mistake of considering corruption as a unique occurrence exclusive to the African continent. It is a colonial historical problem, and therefore a present-day governance problem which requires a historic and holistic solution. In Namibia, the realization that corruption has a direct relation with our colonial history and has left a legacy of degeneration in which many Namibians are deeply imprisoned, has enabled the successive post-independence government administration since 1990 to adopt a holistic, multi-layered approach towards corruption. This comes in the form of specific policy pronouncements supported by tangible construction of key governance architecture to establish better functioning systems, strongly mandated institutions, and transparent processes. Accordingly, one such policy pronouncement has been to put in priority of our poverty eradication in Namibia, given that the poverty trap is a colonial legacy, is a main enabling for corruption to flourish and become systemic. A clear focus was placed on poverty eradication, which culminated in the establishment of a dedicated ministry for poverty eradication and social welfare, establishment of a national food bank, and an increase in the amounts of social welfare grants, such as the old age pension grants for those who are over 60, and onwards, disability grant and the grants to veterans of the liberation struggle to address endemic poverty in our country. In this regard, it has been positively reported by our Namibian Statistical Agency that national poverty, which stood at 70% way back in 1994, had decreased to 18% as per the statistics of 2015-2016. At the same time, the Namibian government having realized that the country's colonial past caused the present-day exclusion of thousands of Namibians from economic mainstream, prioritized engagement of the country in the second struggle, which is the economically emancipating all Namibians. This engagement is seen in the introduction of the Harambee Prosperity Plan, which is a targeted high-impact plan centered on 5 pillars of effective governance, economic advancement, social progression, infrastructural development, and international relations and cooperation. Among others, by implementing the plan, government seeks outcomes such as a spirit of entrepreneurship, resulting in increased youth enterprise development, a significant drop in levels of poverty, a high performance of citizen-centered culture or service delivery, and a more transparent Namibian society. In order to unify a nation which has been divided along racial lines of exclusion, courtesy of the then apartheid supremacist policy, the Namibian government has constructed a powerful, all-embracing emotive metaphor such as the concept of one Namibian house where all of us should fit in, Harambee pulling in the same direction, and the feeling that no Namibian citizen should feel left out of that house. And above all, the feeling that we are one Namibia and thus one nation. This is to help the citizenry understand that they are integral co-workers in the nation-building project. Thus, fidelity to a common national vision as opposed to a tribal or regional or religious cause is to take primary position in our Namibian lives. Over and above all the above mentioned, an independent free press, an independent judiciary, and an entire range of corruption countermeasures and laws, such as the Anti-Corruption Act, the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, the Financial Intelligence Act, the Whistleblowers Protection Act, and others are in place, supported by independent enforcement agencies, thus completing the required accountability governance architecture of institutions, processes, and systems. Additionally, Namibia is signatory to a host of regional, continental, and intercontinental legal instruments on the prevention and combating of corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, demonstrating political will to rid Namibia of corruption through transparency and effective governance, our President, Dr. Geingob, and his wife, the First Lady, made voluntary asset declaration, followed by mandatory asset declaration by parliamentarians, including ministers, namely to present their assets to the Speaker of Parliament, while civil servants declare their business interests and assets via the Public Service Commission to the Prime Minister. Although we are not there yet, since we have to combat and undo a system of wrongs, abuses, and corruption created over 100 years ago, we believe that the leadership's commitment to effective governance, transparency, accountability, and enhancement of public trust has been set on irreversible course in our country. Hopefully, the holistic Namibian approach to good governance, and I am sure also in this beautiful country, in the fight against corruption, could provide shared lesson for peer African countries in addressing the subject of winning the fight against corruption with practical implementable measures. Your Excellency, when we were singing your national anthem, I tried to sing as loud so that you could hear me, just to register that I know how to sing the Botswana national anthem, because I spent a sizable days of my life in your country, even before we have our own national anthem. Thank you very much. Last, I take this opportunity to express, on behalf of my president, Dr. Geingob, and the people of the Republic of Namibia, and indeed on my own behalf, our utmost gratitude to Your Excellency, President Mokgweetsi Masisi of the Republic of Botswana, your staff members, your ministers, and the people of Botswana for the excellent, warm African hospitality which you have accorded to my delegation since our arrival. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to invite His Excellency Dr. Mokgweetsi Eric Masisi to render the official opening address of this conference. Your Excellency, sir.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dearest delegates, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, a very good afternoon. I was just saying to the Vice President of Namibia that when we get the graveyard shift, we tend to be a little faster so we can get on with business. But let me say that it's a real pleasure, indeed a real pleasure and distinct honor and privilege to have been requested to officiate at this high-level dialogue on democracy, on human rights, and governance. Let me take this opportunity to add my voice of welcome to you all to this very important conference. I also wish to extend a hearty welcome to our dearest guests from outside Botswana and thank them for honoring the invitation to participate at this high-level dialogue. I'd like, in the same way, to thank most graciously the African Union for choosing Botswana to host this 7th high-level dialogue on democracy, human rights, and governance. We are truly humbled by the honor to host this event, and please extend that to the chairperson of the Commission, to the chairperson of the Union. It's common knowledge that most of the conflicts in the African continent remain etched in the competition for resources and access to state power, or determination to retain beyond sell-by-date state power. In addition, the lack of due regard for basic human rights of our people also continues to ferment tensions, resulting in the perpetuation of such conflicts. This situation breeds and grows corruption. It breeds and grows political instability, which impede the much-needed economic progress on the continent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this conference is particularly apt, as has been stated earlier, to be winning the fight against corruption, a sustainable path to Africa's transformation. It's particularly apt in addressing corruption from a developmental perspective. Therefore, today presents an opportunity for us to demonstrate our resolve as Africa in the promotion of the ideals of democracy, the ideals of human rights, and good governance. It is an opportunity that enjoins us to collectively recognize and embrace the distinct correlation between the prudent management of resources, democracy, the respect for human rights, and good governance. We should thus strive to harness this correlation for the betterment of the lives of our people and economic prosperity on the continent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen and delegates, as you're all aware, corruption is the most universally known impediment to socio-economic development. It remains the single biggest threat to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, as adopted by members of the UN in 2015. You will be interested to know that corruption as a constant variable is featured under Chapter 5 of Agenda 2063 of the African Union. It is correctly identified as a risk and impediment to the attainment of aspiration number 3, which is an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. According to Agenda 2063, Africa may not be able to realize inclusive growth and sustainable development because, and not in spite of corruption. Furthermore, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption describes corruption as an insidious plague that undermines democracy and leads to violations of human rights, distorting markets, and eroding the quality of life. I guess perhaps a more elegant way of saying thieves in ties and suits. Transparency International also defines corruption as a complex social, political, and economic phenomena that affects all countries. It undermines democratic institutions, slowing economic development, and contributing to political instability in many countries. So there is no country that is absolved of this plague. At the 4th Joint Conference of the Ministers of Finance, Planning, and Economic Development, held in March this year, under the auspices of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, a decision was taken to establish a high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa. According to the report from this panel, as was stated, Africa loses a whopping $50 billion annually through such illicit financial flows. This report, as well as research elsewhere, including the General Library on Anti-Corruption, show that the real cost of corruption in Africa remains at best an estimate and at worst unknown. I therefore make a humble request for researchers, practitioners, and academics to engage in work that will serve to inform us of the real true cost of corruption across African countries, across sectors, and across industries. This will allow us to formulate national policies and develop relevant programs and strategies to fight this scourge. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that the continent is blessed with vast resources which have not translated, in most cases, into economic growth and wealth for our countries and our people. We have vast deposits of mineral wealth and raw materials, most of which are exported to the developed world. However, the proceeds of these exports have not brought about meaningful economic growth and transformation to the continent, as the majority of our people still live in abject poverty. I am therefore pleased to note that this conference, with participation from diverse fields, covering academia, civil society, governments, business and international organizations, as well as experts on democracy, on governance, human rights, and anti-corruption, will contribute meaningfully to efforts towards fighting the scourge of corruption. And I pledge I will be by President Buhari's side in taking this to the agenda of the heads of state of Africa. We all know that African leaders have over the years come up with legal instruments to address corruption and its implications on peace, stability, and socio-economic development in Africa. It is therefore important for Africans to tap into their traditions, which serve to buttress democracy, social and political stability, respect for human rights, rule of law, prudent macroeconomic management, and socio-economic development. Indeed, African leaders have at various African Union high-level meetings continued to discuss a wide range of peace and security initiatives aimed at preventing, managing, and resolving conflicts and crises situations on the continent. All these efforts are geared towards bringing about peace and stability, which will lead to a conducive environment for sustainable economic growth. But alas, the question must be asked, why are we where we are still? I am pleased to note that the agenda for this conference will be facilitated by great minds from this continent, including ministers from different countries in Africa, and cover topical areas and issues which we all have to deal with in one way or the other. Botswana has over the years received favorable accolades in the area of good governance and has accordingly received good ratings from Transparency International. This, however, has not driven us to a false sense of complacency and must not. My government continuously strives to put in place measures and mechanisms through application of best practices of good governance to ensure that corruption is not just defeated, but kept at bay. The long-standing peace, democracy, and good governance experience Botswana is often cited for predates the French Revolution. Yes, it predates the French Revolution. And I'm not talking about the strikes that are going on now. Botswana, in their respective communities, have always had a Khotla system. Khotla, spelled K-G-O-T-L-A. Khotla is a guttural KG, which is a community-level participatory governance system through which public opinion, consultation, adoption of key decisions, as well as arbitration are processed. The Khotla system, and this is our contribution to the vocabulary of the English language. Khotla is now English. The Khotla system has maintained social cohesion and unity in various communities and promotes freedom of expression and equality before the law, a hallmark of respect for human rights. We have managed to infuse the Khotla system into the modern-day democratic process such that it continues to play its important role at the community and national levels. The Khotla system is therefore the foundation of our democratic institutions and culture. Furthermore, Botswana has remained a multi-party democracy as provided for in the Constitution. In this respect, Botswana has held 11 multi-party elections since independence in 1966, and we will be holding our 12th without a hitch or doubt in the year of our Lord 2019. Distinguished guests, Botswana has in recent years, in the fight against corruption, developed standards for corruption risk management. I strongly believe there is a foundation for the execution of an effective anti-corruption program. There must be a strong political will in all its facets, including promulgation of supportive legislation and legislative frameworks, and the development of administrative as well as institutional anti-corruption capacity requirements. In this respect, we have established oversight institutions such as the Directorate on Corruption and Economic Crime, the Office of the Ombudsman, the Botswana Unified Revenue Services, the Botswana Police Service, the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Board, the Competition Authority, and the Directorate on Public Prosecutions, without forgetting the Financial Intelligence Agency. Efforts from these institutions have gone a long way in ensuring that public resources are managed prudently. Government is committed to introducing a combination of new legislation and ethical codes, including specific legislation on declaration of assets and liabilities, to further enhance transparency. The bill on declaration of assets and liabilities has been drafted and will be ready for presentation to Parliament in due course. However, despite our best efforts, we are aware as government that there is certainly a lot of room for improvement in our systems. In order to achieve the desired results, we cannot, though, as a country, hope to win this war alone. Collaborative efforts across the continent are a prerequisite, and corruption is a cross-border phenomenon. Of course, corruption is not just an African issue, but a global scourge affecting both developed and developing countries, sometimes alike, sometimes unalike. That notwithstanding, it should remain a high priority for us in Africa to commit to fighting and defeating it. My government is willing to exchange experiences with you and all of you. I can assure you that we will embrace and adopt In fact, we finally decided on warmth and welcoming spirit. And warmth, I'm not just talking of the temperature that you experience, but warmth in the affective sense. Time permitting, please feel free to interact with our people and indeed visit Gaborone and even visit the old colonial Gaborons. Apulae.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you very much, distinguished guests and presenters. We've just come to the end of our first round introductory session. After a short break, we will reconvene to get more illumination from some of the panelists up here. And of course, have an interactive session where I would expect you to make comment and participate in the discussions, not just as passive listeners, but active participants. Thank you very much, Permanent Secretary.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Let me also extend my appreciation to the Excellencies for the very informative statements. The next item is a group photo. May I kindly invite the VIPs to join the VVIPs on stage. And the VIPs, I mean, the ambassadors accredited to the AU, the members of the AU Advisory Board on Corruption. Please join the Excellencies on stage and please stand behind the Excellencies. I believe they know themselves, otherwise I can remind them. Photographers? Oh, you are ready? As they join the Excellencies on stage, may I also kindly remind the heads of diplomatic